Alright guys, so in this video, I want to go over the concept of the power of 3. Now this concept, I apply it when I do see it. It doesn't happen often, but when I do see it, it's a very good confirmation to get into a trade. So what is the power of 3? Well, first off, in the power of 3, there are 3 stages. The first step is accumulation. The second step is manipulation. And the third step is distribution. Now, ideally, accumulation occurs during Asian session. Manipulation occurs during London session. And distribution occurs from London to New York. Now, if we look at these notes that I created a long time ago, we can see here that first it's the Asian range, the accumulation. Usually the consolidation would occur from 20 Eastern time, this is Eastern time, to 1 Eastern time. So 20 Eastern time, that's military time. So this is around from 10 to 1 a.m. The accumulation occurs from 10 p.m. Eastern time to 1 a.m. Eastern time. So what happens next is we do know that during London session, it is a prime time to be looking at liquidity grabs, turtle soup, Judas swing. They all mean the same thing, but they're just said in different terms. So let's just use liquidity grab because that's the most simplest. So we know that London session is prime time for liquidity grabs. So during Asian session, I'll give you guys an example. During Asian session, we should see price just consolidating. This is during Asian session. Then at this point, once we are consolidating, this is the accumulation stage. What happens is price during London session, we know it's prime time for liquidity grab. So if we are bearish on the higher time frame, price during London session grabs all the liquidity and creates a liquidity grab. London session. And this stage is called the manipulation stage. And then going to New York, what happens is price grabs liquidity and it distributes all the way to the end of New York. Those are the 3 stages of the power of 3. Now, where would our entry be? Our entry should be at this point, at the manipulation point. Ideally, what we want to see is, and I'll show you guys an example. Ideally, what we want to see is accumulation, price manipulates or liquidity grab during London session open, 3 a.m. Eastern time, and price comes to some form of institutional resistance, whether it's an order block, a breaker block, some type of resistance area, and that's when we would sell. Now, going back to the PDF, so we see the first step is the accumulation, which happens pre-London. The second step is the manipulation. And I'll show you guys an example. Alright guys, so for the first example, this is a picture that I got from my gallery from years ago in 2020. And I just remember this day where everything played out so cleanly. So I'll just go over it quickly. As we can see during Asian session, that price was accumulating. Then we had that liquidity grab during London session open. This was at 3 a.m. Eastern time. And we can see that price grabbed liquidity, came to an order block, respected off that 15-minute order block. And the next part is the distribution. So we can see accumulation, manipulation, and distribution. And if you guys already watched the OTE video, we know that New York session is prime time for retracements. So price came to my OTE level, 79% OTE level during New York session. And it was a very nice clean sell off that level on top of a London session sell. So this was a very ideal prime example. So going back to the power of 3, let me show you guys another example. In this case, in this scenario, we did see that price did not follow the kill zone time. But like I mentioned before, It's definitely ideal to correlate this with time for Asian session to be the accumulation, London session to be the manipulation, and New York session to be a distribution. But sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. As we can see the accumulation, then we can see the manipulation happening in New York session, and then a distribution. This is just an example of when the power of 3 plays out but not following the time zone. Now I'll show you guys another example of the power of 3, but this one following the time zones or the kill zone sessions. So Asian session, we do see price consolidating within this range. Then we see that during London session 3-4 a.m. we can see price being manipulated. Let me draw this out to make it clear. So this is London, this is Asian range, and this is the distribution. So what do we see, guys? We see during Asian session, we see that consolidation, we see that accumulation. Then we see during London session, price manipulates. Price consolidates, manipulates, comes to an institutional resistance level. As we can see, this is a very nice clean breaker block. So this would be a nice resistance area. And this is where we would enter. We would enter exactly at this area. We would wait during London session 3-4 a.m. for price to come to our entry, place stop loss above the high for 1 to 2. And then during London session, going to New York session, during the distribution phase, let's see, distribution. During the distribution phase, we see that price hits our TP for a clean 1 or 2. And this is just another example of the power of 3 following the concepts of London session being a prime time for liquidity grabs. A reminder, guys, that we are entering during the manipulation stage. We are entering during the manipulation stage, not the other stages. Once price accumulates during Asian, higher time frame is backing us up, meaning following the IOF, the institutional order flow, or basically the same thing as trend. And then price manipulates, grabs liquidity, a liquidity grab, and hits an institutional resistance or support. That's when we enter. So as we can see here, this is the manipulation stage, and this is exactly when we enter. And then during the distribution stage is when price will come to our TP. And also what usually happens after a power of 3 is that during New York session, we see an OTE, or basically the same thing as retracement if you have gone through that lesson. And that will be a very clean sell. In this situation, during the New York session, price just distributed all the way down to our TP, but we can see price retraces during the next London session. So this wouldn't be an ideal OTE level, but we do see that price retraced back and continued on to the downside following the higher time frame. Now going back to the PDF, as we can see here, there's more explanation and you guys can read it. This will be attached to the video. So in this situation, as you guys do know, I do place my stop loss at a 101 in break even, but I do explain previously that it says that you place your stop loss once we are below Asian session low. So for example, in this scenario, it would be once we do pass these lows, that's when we will place stop loss to entry. But you can pick whichever one. I like to stick with my system. I like to have everything technical, everything robotic. I don't want to think during a trade. And let me just see, just to wrap this video up, let me see if I missed anything. So this is just a diagram for you guys. Price during Asian session consolidates, price comes up during London session. During London session, London open, as we can see down here, price grabs liquidity, comes to an institutional resistance area, rejects off that level. And could we see a potential New York open OTE? Could we see Could we see a retracement during New York session? Then that'll be another good place to sell. But that'll be all for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next.